Have you ever felt that strange, unsettling sensation? The one that creeps in during those rare moments of complete honesty with yourself? That perhaps the story you've been telling about your life is just that. A story? A narrative crafted to make sense of the chaos. To convince yourself that your hands are firmly on the wheel? I remember standing at my father's funeral, watching as they lowered his body into the ground. A man who had planned every detail of his life meticulously, who believed with absolute certainty that he was the architect of his destiny. And yet there he was, taken by a random cellular mutation that cared nothing for his plans, his discipline, his illusion of control. In that moment, I felt the first threads of my own carefully woven tapestry of control begin to unravel, and I wondered, how much of what we call choice is merely the story we tell ourselves after events have already been set in motion by forces beyond our understanding? We build our lives on the foundation of a beautiful lie that we are the conscious authors of our existence, making deliberate choices from an infinite menu of possibilities. We wake each morning believing we decide when to rise, what to eat, which path to take, whom to love. This illusion is so fundamental to our experience that questioning it feels like questioning gravity itself. Yet beneath this comforting facade lies a more unsettling reality. Most of what we call choice is merely reaction. Most of what we call intention is rationalization after the fact. The human mind is a masterful storyteller, weaving narratives that place us at the center of our universe, the hero of our journey. We remember our successes as products of our brilliance and determination, while our failures become bad luck or the interference of others. This selective memory isn't malicious, it's survival. The alternative, acknowledging how little we truly control, threatens to plunge us into an abyss of meaninglessness from which there seems no return. Consider the last major decision you made, a career change perhaps, or the beginning or end of a relationship. You likely felt you weighed options carefully, considered consequences, and made a rational choice. But neuroscience tells us a different story. Your brain had already decided before your conscious mind became aware. What you experienced as deliberation was largely justification for a decision already made in the neural pathways shaped by genetics, childhood experiences, cultural programming, and random environmental factors you never chose. The illusion runs deeper still. Even our most cherished values, the moral principles we believe define us, were largely installed in us before we had any say in the matter. The religion you practice or reject, your political leanings, even your taste in music and art, all bear the unmistakable fingerprints of your upbringing, your culture, your historical moment. The very metrics by which you measure a life well lived were handed to you before you developed the capacity to question them. And yet we cling to the belief that we are self-made, that our achievements are ours alone. We build elaborate systems of reward and punishment on this premise, praising success as evidence of virtue, condemning failure as deserved. This fundamental attribution error, overestimating personal factors and underestimating situational ones, isn't just a cognitive bias. It's the cornerstone of our social order, the justification for vast inequalities we might otherwise find intolerable. The most insidious aspect of this illusion is how it shapes our emotional landscape. When we believe we control our destiny, every setback becomes not merely unfortunate, but personally devastating evidence of our inadequacy. The promotion that went to someone else, the relationship that dissolved despite your best efforts, the persistent anxiety that medication can't seem to touch, all become indictments of your character rather than what they often are, the complex interplay of countless factors, most beyond your influence. Look at your own life with unflinching honesty. How much of what defines you, your nationality, your native language, your early education, your physical attributes, your formative relationships, was chosen by you? Even your responses to these unchosen circumstances were shaped by a temperament you didn't select, by cognitive patterns established long before you developed self-awareness. The very tools with which you might attempt to reshape your destiny were themselves shaped by forces outside your control. What we call free will exists, if at all, in vanishingly small spaces. Brief moments where conscious awareness might nudge our trajectory slightly before the overwhelming current of our unconscious programming, social conditioning, and circumstantial limitations reasserts its dominance. And yet, we build entire philosophies, religions, economic systems, and personal identities on the premise that we captain our own ships, that our destinations are determined primarily by our skill and effort, rather than by winds and currents we neither created nor command. Does this recognition not explain the peculiar exhaustion of modern life? The constant striving, the endless self-improvement, the crushing disappointment when our efforts fail to yield the promised results? Perhaps our exhaustion stems not from working too hard, but from fighting against reality itself, from the Sisyphean task of maintaining the illusion of control in a universe that continuously demonstrates our profound limitations. In the gleaming cathedrals of consumer capitalism, we worship at the altar of endless choice. 37 varieties of toothpaste, hundreds of television channels, thousands of potential partners a swipe away. This abundance is marketed as freedom, as the ultimate expression of personal autonomy. Yet paradoxically, this explosion of options has coincided with rising rates of anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of meaninglessness. The tyranny of choice reveals itself not in restriction, but in overwhelming abundance, in the creeping suspicion that somewhere among the infinite possibilities lies the perfect life you've somehow failed to select. Kierkegaard understood this paradox centuries before our modern choice paralysis had a name. He spoke of anxiety as the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo that comes when we peer into the abyss of infinite possibility and find no objective basis for choosing one path over another. Without external constraints to narrow our options, without traditions to guide us, we're left with the crushing responsibility of authoring our existence from scratch, knowing that each choice eliminates countless other possibilities forever. The marketplace exploits this existential uncertainty masterfully. It sells not just products, but identities, lifestyles, versions of yourself you might become, if only you purchase the right combination of goods and experiences. The underlying message is always the same. Your current life is inadequate, but through proper consumption, you might yet construct a self worthy of admiration. The pursuit of the ideal life becomes an endless treadmill, always promising fulfillment just beyond the next purchase, the next achievement, the next relationship. What we rarely acknowledge is how this abundance of choice is itself an illusion. The options presented to us exist within narrow parameters defined by economic systems, cultural norms, and technological limitations we did not choose. You can select any career you want, provided it exists within the current economic structure. You can live anywhere if you can afford it. You can pursue any lifestyle as long as it doesn't deviate too far from what your society considers acceptable. The choices that might truly transform the game itself remain largely invisible, unthinkable. Consider how your most significant life decisions were constrained by factors beyond your control. Your career path was limited by the economic reality of your birth era, by educational opportunities available to someone of your background, by aptitudes you didn't choose to possess. Your romantic partnerships were constrained by geography, by social circles determined largely by circumstance, by attachment patterns formed in early childhood. Even your leisure activities, what you do with your supposedly free time, are shaped by what your culture defines as enjoyable, by what your social class deems appropriate. The most profound constraint on our choices may be our own minds, the invisible architecture of thought patterns, emotional responses, and unconscious biases that filter our perception of possibilities before they even reach conscious awareness. How many options have you never considered because they lie outside the narrative you've constructed about who you are? How many paths remain unexplored because they contradict the identity you've been cultivating since childhood? The walls of our mental prisons are often self-constructed, yet built from materials we did not manufacture. When we do manage to make what feels like a truly autonomous choice, a bold career change perhaps, or ending a long-term relationship that no longer serves us, we often discover that what felt like liberation leads to new forms of constraint. The exciting startup demands even longer hours than your corporate job. The exhilarating new relationship eventually reveals limitations as binding as the one you left. The geographic relocation exchanges one set of cultural expectations for another. The illusion of having finally seized control gives way to the recognition that you've simply traded one set of limitations for another. What would it mean to truly choose? Not merely to select from prefabricated options, but to create the conditions of choice itself? Perhaps this is what Nietzsche meant by becoming the poet of our lives. Not merely selecting from existing narratives, but authoring new ones, creating values rather than inheriting them. Yet even this radical vision of autonomy must contend with the stubborn reality that we create within constraints we did not choose, using minds and bodies shaped by forces beyond our control. Does this recognition not explain the peculiar emptiness that often follows getting exactly what we thought we wanted? The promotion that was supposed to bring fulfillment, the relationship that was meant to complete us, the achievement that should have silenced our inner critic, all eventually reveal themselves as insufficient because the very framework within which we defined these goals was itself inherited, not chosen. We climb ladders only to discover they were leaning against the wrong walls we didn't build, in cities we never consciously chose to inhabit. Beneath the surface of conscious thought lies the true architect of your existence, the vast, mysterious realm of the unconscious mind. This hidden domain, which Jung explored with such profound insight, operates according to its own logic, pursuing agendas often at odds with your conscious intentions. You believe you chose your partner for their kindness, their intelligence, their shared values, yet something deeper drew you to them. Perhaps the echo of an unresolved parental relationship, or the familiar comfort of emotional patterns established long before you had words to name them. The unconscious doesn't announce its influence. It disguises itself as intuition, as inexplicable attraction or aversion, as the sudden certainty that this job, this home, this life path is right for you. Only later, sometimes decades later, do we glimpse the hidden patterns, the repetition of familiar dynamics, the unconscious recreation of childhood environments, the mysterious gravitational pull toward situations that confirm our deepest, often most self-limiting beliefs about who we are and what we deserve. Our most significant life choices, whom to love, where to live, how to work, emerge from this complex interplay between conscious reasoning and unconscious programming. We construct elaborate rational justifications for decisions that were, in reality, driven by emotional forces operating below the threshold of awareness. The job you logically chose for its security perhaps truly appealed to the part of you still seeking to appease an anxious parent. The relationship you entered for companionship perhaps unconsciously recreates the emotional unavailability you experienced in childhood. a familiar pain preferred over the disorienting territory of genuine intimacy. What we experience as personality, the seemingly stable collection of traits and tendencies we call me, is largely the visible surface of unconscious adaptations to early environments we didn't choose. The perfectionism you pride yourself on may be a strategy developed to secure conditional love from demanding caregivers. The independence you cherish might be a defense mechanism against the pain of early abandonment. The ambition driving your career may be an unconscious attempt to prove your worth to someone who never fully saw you. We mistake our adaptive strategies for our authentic selves. The unconscious reveals itself most clearly in our contradictions, in the gap between what we say we want and what we repeatedly create in our lives. You claim to desire a loving relationship, yet consistently choose partners who cannot meet your emotional needs. You insist you want financial security, yet sabotage opportunities for advancement. You declare your commitment to health while maintaining habits that undermine it. These are not failures of willpower, but glimpses of the unconscious architect at work, pursuing agendas that conscious awareness has not yet recognized or integrated. What would it mean to truly know yourself? Not the carefully curated self-image you present to others, not the idealized version you aspire to become, but the whole truth of who you are, including the shadow aspects you've disowned, the wounds you've concealed even from yourself, the patterns you enact without understanding their origins. This is the journey Jung called individuation, the painful, liberating process of bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness, not to control it, but to engage with it, to integrate rather than repress. Perhaps true agency begins not with asserting control, but with surrendering the illusion of it, with acknowledging how profoundly we've been shaped by forces beyond our choosing. There is a peculiar freedom in recognizing how unfree we've been, in seeing clearly the invisible hands that have molded our desires, our fears, our very sense of self. Only by acknowledging these influences can we begin the slow, imperfect work of discerning which aspects of ourselves we wish to affirm and which we might, with great effort and compassion, begin to transform. Have you ever experienced that disorienting moment when you suddenly see yourself clearly, when you recognize a pattern you've been blindly repeating for years, perhaps a way of relating to others that unconsciously recreates old wounds? In that moment of clarity, painful as it may be, something shifts. The pattern doesn't immediately dissolve, but awareness creates a small space, a pause between stimulus and response where new possibilities might emerge. This is not control as we've been taught to understand it, but something subtler, the beginning of a different relationship with yourself. The path toward greater awareness is neither straight nor comfortable. It requires facing aspects of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding, questioning narratives that have provided security and meaning, acknowledging how much of what you call me was constructed in response to conditions you didn't choose. Yet, in this uncomfortable truth lies the seed of authentic transformation. Not the superficial change promised by self-help platitudes, but the profound shift that comes from seeing yourself with unflinching clarity and choosing, within the constraints of your conditioning, to author the next chapter with greater consciousness. We speak of society as though it were something separate from ourselves, a structure imposed upon us, a system we navigate. Yet society exists nowhere but in the collective agreement of millions of minds, in the shared illusions we maintain together. Money has value because we collectively agree it does. Laws have power because we collectively submit to them. Status hierarchies determine our opportunities because we collectively recognize and reinforce them. The most profound control over our lives comes not from any individual, but from these collective fictions we rarely think to question. Consider how thoroughly your sense of what constitutes success has been shaped by social consensus. The milestones you strive for, career advancement, home ownership, family formation, wealth accumulation, these weren't derived from deep personal reflection on what would bring you fulfillment. They were absorbed from your culture, your family, your peer group, your media consumption. Even your rebellion against conventional success metrics likely follows culturally established patterns of acceptable dissent. The countercultural path has its own conformities, its own unexamined assumptions. The social illusion extends beyond obvious external markers to the very language of your inner life. The emotions you recognize and express, the categories through which you understand your experiences, the metaphors you use to make meaning, all bear the unmistakable imprint of your cultural context. Depression becomes chemical imbalance in one society, spiritual crisis in another, demonic possession in a third. The same internal experience gets categorized, expressed, and treated according to collective beliefs you inherited rather than created. Our social nature runs deeper than we acknowledge. The boundaries between self and other are far more permeable than our individualistic ideology suggests. You unconsciously mirror the facial expressions, vocal patterns, and physical postures of those around you. Your brain contains specialized neurons, mirror neurons, dedicated to this unconscious synchronization with others. Your very sense of self emerges not in isolation, but through relationship, through the reflecting mirrors of other minds, recognizing and responding to you. The most insidious aspect of social control lies in its invisibility, in how thoroughly we internalize external expectations until they feel like authentic desires arising from within. You don't need an external authority demanding conformity when you've installed their voice in your own mind, when their judgments have become your own self-criticism. This is what Foucault meant by the modern form of power. Not the obvious coercion of physical force, but the subtle discipline of internalized norms that make external enforcement largely unnecessary. Yet within these social constraints, pockets of authentic resistance and creation do emerge. In the spaces between prescribed roles, in the gaps between what society demands and what the soul requires, individuals and communities have always found ways to carve out zones of relative freedom. The artist creating forms that expand our sense of the possible. The philosopher questioning premises others take for granted. The ordinary person who, in small daily acts of courage, chooses integrity over conformity, compassion over convenience, presence over performance. What would it mean to distinguish between the socially constructed aspects of your identity and something more essential? Not to escape social influence, an impossible task, but to develop a more conscious relationship with it? To recognize which parts of your self-concept, your values, your goals reflect genuine inner alignment and which represent unconscious conformity to expectations you've never truly examined? This discernment requires both ruthless honesty about how thoroughly you've been shaped by social forces and tender protection of the authentic impulses that emerge despite that shaping. The paradox of social existence is that the same interconnection that constrains us also sustains us. The recognition that you are not a separate, autonomous entity, but part of a vast web of relationships, can be either oppressive or liberating, depending on how you hold it. The same social embeddedness that limits individual freedom also creates the conditions for meaning, for belonging, for the profound human experiences that make life worth living. Complete autonomy, were it possible, would not be freedom, but isolation, the ultimate prison. Perhaps true agency within social constraints begins with this recognition that while you cannot step outside the social web that partly constitutes your being, you can develop a more conscious relationship with it. You can learn to notice when you're acting from internalized expectations rather than authentic values. You can question the metrics of success you've unconsciously adopted. You can seek communities that nurture rather than diminish your most authentic expression. You can participate in the ongoing creation of culture rather than merely consuming it. This is not escape from social influence, but engagement with it, not freedom from context, but freedom within it. What if the path to genuine agency begins not with seizing control, but with surrendering the illusion of it? What if our desperate clutching at certainty, at security, at the fantasy of directing our fate is precisely what keeps us trapped in unconscious patterns, in reactive living, in the exhausting performance of a life rather than its authentic experience? Perhaps there is wisdom in what the Taoists call Wu Wei, not passive resignation, but the paradoxical action through non-action. The effortless effort that comes from aligning with rather than resisting the fundamental nature of existence. Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps, discovered a profound truth that reverberates beyond his extreme circumstances. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. In the most severely constrained external conditions imaginable, he found that one freedom remained inviolable: the freedom to determine one's attitude toward suffering, to choose the meaning one assigned to even the most horrific circumstances. This is not the shallow freedom of unlimited options, but the profound liberty of internal response, available even when external choices have been stripped away. Consider the paradoxical relationship between control and anxiety. The more desperately you try to control uncertain outcomes, the more acutely you feel anxiety's grip. The more elaborate your attempts to ensure security through wealth accumulation, through relationship management, through careful image cultivation, the more vulnerable you feel to the inevitable disruptions that no amount of planning can prevent. What if anxiety itself is not the problem, but the natural response to the fundamental insecurity of existence, exacerbated by the exhausting pretense that sufficient effort can eliminate uncertainty? The wisdom traditions across cultures point to a counterintuitive truth: that acceptance of impermanence, of uncertainty, of the fundamental uncontrollability of life does not lead to passive resignation, but to a more authentic form of engagement. When you stop expending enormous energy maintaining the illusion of control, resources become available for genuine presence, for responding to what is rather than frantically trying to make reality conform to your expectations. There is a profound difference between surrendering to circumstances and surrendering the belief that circumstances should be different than they are. This surrender is not about abandoning intention or abdicating responsibility for what is genuinely within your sphere of influence. Rather, it involves developing clarity about where that sphere begins and ends, about what you can affect and what you cannot. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, focusing your energy on your own choices, actions, and attitudes, while releasing attachment to outcomes that depend on factors beyond your influence. This is not pessimism, but pragmatism. The recognition that much of the suffering in life comes not from external events themselves, but from the desperate struggle against what cannot be changed. The paradox deepens when we consider how this surrender of the illusion of control might actually expand our capacity for meaningful action. When you're no longer driven by anxiety about outcomes, by the desperate need to prove your worth through achievement, by the exhausting maintenance of a carefully constructed identity, what becomes possible? Perhaps a more authentic form of agency emerges, not the frantic doing of the ego, but the aligned action that arises when you're no longer at war with reality itself. Consider those moments in your life when you've experienced what athletes and artists call flow. That state of complete absorption where self-consciousness falls away, where action seems to unfold through you rather than from you. In these moments, the usual boundary between self and activity dissolves. You are neither controlling the process nor being controlled by it, but participating in something that transcends this dichotomy. These experiences offer a glimpse of what engagement without the illusion of control might look like, not passive surrender, but active participation in a reality larger than your individual will. What might it mean to live more consistently from this recognition? Not to abandon goals or responsibility, but to hold them differently, to act with full commitment while releasing attachment to specific outcomes, to care deeply without making your well-being contingent on circumstances aligning with your preferences. This is the territory explored by Eastern philosophies like Buddhism, which suggests that suffering arises not from pain itself, but from resistance to what is, from the mind's insistence that reality should conform to its demands. The ultimate paradox may be this: that genuine freedom comes not from expanding the sphere of external control, but from releasing the internal demand that life conform to your expectations. The person who must have certainty, who cannot tolerate ambiguity, who requires specific outcomes to feel secure, this person is fundamentally unfree, regardless of their external circumstances. True liberty may lie in developing the capacity to remain open, responsive, and engaged in the face of uncertainty, to act without the guarantee of outcomes, to love knowing that loss is inevitable, to live fully aware of your fundamental vulnerability rather than exhausting yourself in futile attempts to transcend it. In the quiet hours, when the noise of striving subsides, when the carefully maintained facade of certainty begins to crack, a different kind of truth emerges, not the harsh truth of meaninglessness that nihilism proclaims, but a gentler recognition that perhaps our worth was never contingent on our control. That dignity resides not in mastery of circumstances, but in how we meet them. That meaning emerges not from imposing our will upon the world, but from the quality of our attention to it, from the depth of our presence within the brief, precious span we're given. The illusion of control is perhaps the most persistent and costly of human delusions, yet its unraveling need not lead to despair. There is a peculiar liberation in recognizing how thoroughly we've been shaped by forces beyond our choosing, how fundamentally embedded we are in systems larger than ourselves, how profoundly mysterious remain the workings of our own minds. This recognition doesn't diminish human dignity, but places it on firmer ground, not in the fantasy of self-creation, but in the reality of conscious participation in a vast, intricate dance we neither lead nor follow but join, already in progress, contributing our brief but irreplaceable part. What remains when the illusion of control dissolves is not helplessness, but a different kind of agency, the capacity to respond rather than merely react, to bring awareness to patterns previously enacted blindly, to participate more consciously in your own unfolding. You cannot choose the cards you're dealt, but you can learn to play them with greater skill, with deeper presence, with unexpected creativity. You cannot direct the wind, but you can adjust your sails. You cannot control how long you live, but you can attend to the quality of your living, to whether you move through your days awake or asleep, connected or isolated, open or defended, against the fundamental vulnerability that is the price of admission to a fully human life. Perhaps this is what it means to truly grow up, not to perfect the illusion of control, but to outgrow the need for it, to develop the capacity to stand in the uncertain present without frantically grasping for certainty or retreating into comforting delusions, to acknowledge how little we know, how little we control, how little we can guarantee, and to discover that we can bear this truth, that something within us is equal to it, that we can build meaningful lives not on the sandy foundation of certainty, but on the bedrock of our capacity to remain present and engaged, even in the face of fundamental uncertainty. In the end, the question may not be whether you're in control of your life, but whether you're available to it, whether you're showing up for the experience you're actually having, rather than constantly struggling against it in pursuit of the experience you think you should be having. The invitation is not to passive resignation, but to active surrender, to the recognition that life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. That control is not a destination to be reached, but an illusion to be seen through. That freedom lies not in the absence of constraints, but in how we dance within them. And so we return to where we began, to the recognition that the story you tell about your life is indeed a story, a narrative woven from the threads of experience, memory, culture, and imagination. But this recognition doesn't render the story meaningless. Rather, it invites you to hold your narrative more lightly, to revise it with greater consciousness, to author it with the awareness that you are both the writer and a character within a larger story you didn't begin and won't conclude. This is not absolute freedom, but it may be the only kind available to beings such as ourselves, finite, embodied, interdependent, and capable, despite everything, of moments of extraordinary presence, courage, and love. As the light fades and these words settle into the quiet spaces of your mind, remember this. In a universe of infinite complexity, your vulnerability is not weakness. It is your most authentic connection to everything that matters. There is a strange and terrible beauty in recognizing how little we control, how briefly we exist, how thoroughly we've been shaped by forces beyond our choosing. And yet, in that very recognition lies the seed of something profound, a way of being that no longer demands certainty to find peace, that no longer requires control to discover meaning. Perhaps true courage is not found in conquering life, but in surrendering to it fully, with eyes wide open to both its heartbreak and its wonder. In your moments of deepest doubt, when the illusion of control has crumbled and you stand exposed to the raw truth of your existence, know this. You were never meant to master this life. You were meant to witness it, to participate in it, to be transformed by it. And in that humble participation lies a dignity no amount of control could ever provide. This is not the end of your journey, but perhaps the true beginning, the moment when you finally set down the exhausting burden of certainty and discover what it means to live unburdened by the need to know, to direct, to secure. Whatever darkness you carry, whatever uncertainty you face, you are not alone in it. We are all, in our own ways, learning to dance with the uncontrollable mystery that holds us. If something in this journey has resonated with the unspoken questions in your own heart, I invite you to share your reflection in the comments below. What illusion of control are you struggling to release? What unexpected freedom have you found in surrender? Your story matters, and in sharing it, you create space for others to recognize their own. And if you'd like to continue exploring these depths together, subscribe to this channel, not for answers, but for better questions, not for certainty, but for companionship on the path of uncertainty. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply acknowledge to each other that we're all navigating this mystery together. Thank you for the courage it took to stay present through these reflections, for allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to question the stories that have shaped you. Your willingness to look beneath the surface is the rarest form of bravery.